Good evening, everyone. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. If somebody could put something in the chat window saying they can. We're just waiting for Bob Langer to come on. He had a little difficulty, but I think we've got that figured out now, unless he calls me again. But welcome, everyone, to the Hub Cures speaker series, which is going to happen every Tuesday at this time, though we might try a different spot to sort of capture some of the European and Asian markets who are interested in this as well. And these series of speakers are really tied to the theme that we have for the MALSI 2020 event that's coming up on August 20th. And that theme is Collaboration Fuels Innovation. And the speakers that we're attracting to the speaker series are going to be talking about how Massachusetts academic institutions and spin-outs are leading the world out of this pandemic. And so we're going to address different aspects of how Massachusetts is impacting the pandemic. Today's speaker, Bob Langer, is well known to everybody. He's co-founder of Moderna, who's leading in the development of a vaccine against COVID-19, or really against the virus SARS-CoV-2. And next week, we have Rahul Danda, the CEO of Sherlock, a spin-out from Harvard MIT, who are working on a CRISPR diagnostic. And then the following week, we have Carolyn Kirk. Welcome, Bob. I'm just doing kind of my lead up to our chat.
Fine.
And Carolyn Kirk, who's of the Mass Tech Collaborative, and they've really pivoted to helping manufacturers in Massachusetts develop PPE for our healthcare institutions. So she'll be on in the third week, and then we have a bunch of other interesting speakers that are coming. I don't really have to introduce Bob. I think everybody knows who he is, and you saw his bio. He is the most prolific inventor in academia and one of the most prolific inventors ever. And there's no better person to help us kick off this Hub Cure series than Bob. So welcome, Bob. And it looks like you're working from home, and your IT manager is your wife. Yeah. And in my case, I'm the IT manager of the house, but my look and feel manager is my wife. So I've tried really to get the look of all this, in my home office, which I haven't done much, but to try to make it more look like we're doing this at a real fireside chat.
That's my wife elevated this so that I'm no longer in the laundry room. I'm now in the bedroom.
That's a big step up. And so welcome to Hub Cures. We have a couple of hundred people listening to us, and from all over the world, though mostly from Massachusetts. And I think everybody's going to be very interested in hearing from you about, how Massachusetts is going to lead the world out of this pandemic with all our great academic minds and our spin-outs and startups. And, why don't I start off with just a general question? Do you think we could have predicted this pandemic, and are we ready?
Well, could we have predicted this pandemic? I mean, specifically, we couldn't predict this pandemic, but if you look at but I think Bill Gates, had a TED Talk in 2015, and, he was very prophetic. He pointed out how our government and many governments would spend, billions, if not trillions, on military. And as he pointed out, something very, very small would be a lot more dangerous and a lot more expensive. And and he meant pandemics. I mean, he meant pandemics. That was exactly predicted in 2015, and he certainly pointed out that we weren't ready, and certainly we haven't been. I mean, I think there's no question that the United States and actually the whole world was not ready for this, sadly.
Yeah, it seems like the countries that had faced SARS-CoV-1, the first SARS epidemic, were a bit more prepared. Like even our neighbor to the north, Canada, SARS had impacted them more than us. It seems like they were more prepared.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to say. I mean, I feel like I mean, one might argue different kinds of things. I mean, there may be sparser, when there's sparser populations, I think you inherently do better, for this particular disease. It's not like I've done an analysis or I've really seen any, outstanding analysis of what countries are better. I think some countries, may have done a little better, but I feel from a worldwide standpoint, sadly, we have not been prepared. Whether it's the United States, many other countries, the CDC, the World Health Organization. I just feel that, we weren't prepared. I think the advice that people got was poor. And I think, sadly, the world is paying a price and a lot of people have died.
Yeah, so let's now switch to, what we're going to do about it. And, there was a Boston Globe article on you recently about how, you're not anywhere close to retirement, and this pandemic has sort of brought you back out, helping out, and you're helping out in lots of different areas. Probably the one that you're sort of most known for here is having co-founded Moderna. And Moderna seems to be in the lead, to develop a vaccine. There are over 70 therapies in development all over the world. Will there be a clear winner? Will that be Moderna, or will there be multiple therapies?
Well, I think, there's a lot of things embedded in what you asked. Let me just try to answer the last part first. I think in the ideal world, there will be multiple therapies. I don't think, from the standpoint of Moderna or really any company, I actually think it'll be good if and I think people hope there'll be multiple winners, because if we're going to need billions of dosages, and we will, I don't know that any one company in a reasonable period of time is going to be able to make many billions of dosages. I think Moderna hopes to make 1 billion, and some other companies might too. Well, we need more than that. And, I think the Moderna, I'm obviously prejudiced, but I think the Moderna technology is very important, but there's some other ones that also might be important, and it's hard to know, but I think it'll hopefully be helpful if there's a number of winners. Nonetheless, there's a lot of things even in the interim that can be done, and we're trying to help on some of those too, with respect to things in our laboratory and at different companies. But I think it's one of the great things, not great things, but one of the things that I think has happened because of this epidemic is that you see science really playing a prominent role, and many people, many companies, trying to do whatever they can to make the world safer. And I think that whether it's MIT or Boston or anywhere in the world.
That's awesome. So tell us, just educate us a little bit about Moderna's approach to this vaccine development. Why is it better than how vaccines are normally developed?
Well, so basically there's a central dogma that people may know, which is that DNA makes RNA makes protein. So classically, when people tried to make vaccines, they would use inactivated viruses or partially inactivated viruses, or they'd grow up eggs and make proteins. But basically, people would use proteins as the basis, and that would take a lot longer to make. If you use let's say if you use messenger RNA, doesn't take that long to make it. That's why Moderna was in a clinical trial so soon. So you make a messenger RNA against what's called the spike protein of the coronavirus. And then what happens is, rather than you having to have a giant factory making and purifying lots of protein or lots of virus, you just give a little bit of messenger RNA in a nanoparticle, and the body is the factory. the body then takes the messenger RNA and it makes the vaccine. So it's a new technology. I mean, whether it's Moderna or others, but it's one that when we started Moderna, that was part of the vision, was to put messenger RNA and nanoparticles for all kinds of diseases. And so the one that's certainly getting a lot of the publicity is the messenger RNA, but there's actually something like 13, 15 clinical trials with other vaccines and other ways of treating disease using messenger RNA.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So that really fits in sort of the theme of, spin outs that have come from your lab around drug delivery, right? So in a way, this is a type of delivery mechanism.
Well, delivery is important. There's a lot of things that are important. I mean, it's new drug development. I think delivery ends up being important in any type of drug development. Here, nanoparticles play a key role, but really in anything, we've been involved in various drug companies, spinning out various companies to do drugs, to do drug delivery, to do medical devices. So all these things, formulation and drug delivery ends up being key. I mean, so in that sense, yes.
Yeah, and just to talk about some other approaches to therapies, we've read about antibody therapies, from Lilly and Vir and Regeneron. How do those compare to a vaccine?
Well, a vaccine, the person has immunity, and you're, and it can hopefully be long lasting because the body's, has the T cells and the B cells, and they keep making the antibodies. But whereas I would say if you're using the antibody therapy, that's great, but that's a drug treatment. Maybe that will stop or reduce the symptoms that somebody has, but it's not a continuous thing. I mean, so it's so in that sense, it's different.
Right. And so whether it's vaccine development or antibody development or other kind of therapies, is the FDA or the regulatory pathway being accelerated because of this pandemic? Or are things changing? Or things being, going from phase 1 to phase 2? It seems like from what you read that it's happening faster.
It is. I think there's no question that that the FDA is moving faster on this in this particular case. Sure, it's an emergency and people are dying. And I was chairman of the FDA Science Board a number of years ago. I mean, they're a science-based, agency, and I think they're going to do their best to make the right decisions. So I think they're doing it as fast as they can, but you still want to make sure that things are safe and effective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Any other thoughts on the therapy side? Besides the two I just brought up, vaccines and antibodies, are there any other sort of approaches to therapy?
Well, I think there are specific approaches to different therapies. PureTech, which I helped start also, and I'm on the board of, announced, I think yesterday, the day before, about new ways of treating lung disease. I'm working with David Edwards and Denny Osiello on ways of hopefully giving things nasally that helpful to people today, to kill a virus. Certainly there's plenty of companies that are making new drugs. So we're trying to.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's just on the therapy part.
Yeah, that's just on the therapy part. Yeah, and let me sort of switch gears a little bit and talk about diagnostics a bit. And I don't know how involved you are in what's happening in the diagnostic world, but clearly the standard practice today is RT-PCR, which requires sort of the nasal swabs and takes a day or so for the results to come back. Are there new technologies that are on the horizon to replace RT-PCR?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that I'd say, and I'm not an expert on diagnostics, and my involvement is somewhat limited, but I'll go over some of the things. So first of all, I mean, the first question is, how do you collect something? I mean, one of my concerns with a nasal swab is it seems to me very easy to not get enough, so that you'll get a false negative, and I'm very concerned about that. So again, just going to the company part, we started a company called 7 Cents, which is a new blood, and that was one of the ones Boston Globe talked about. So that's actually like a patch that you put on with microneedles, and it's essentially painless way of drawing blood. And there, you could do serology, which in my opinion will be an awful lot more accurate way of getting a sample. Then there are a lot of different ways that different groups are trying to analyze these samples. I mean, there are companies that are doing, I know I was talking to Fang Zhang, and they're doing some stuff over at the Broad that he's published on, and there's different companies doing different techniques. I mean, there are a range of ways that people are analyzing it. And then there are companies like Everlywell and others that are trying to do home testing. But in my opinion, testing's slow. I mean, I know, in fact, I think it's almost next to atrocious. My son's girlfriend went in for a test, I think 4 weeks ago, and this is Massachusetts, she still hasn't gotten the results back. I mean, so it's not, a day would be generous in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got a little bit involved in a couple of campus openings. BU's got an opening plan. Obviously, MIT has an opening plan, but in some ways, higher ed, even more so than companies, is got a very compelling reason to allow students to come back to campus in September, which is, it's once a year that a higher ed collects revenue, or a good portion of its revenue. And if they don't allow students to come in September, they might have a lot of deferral students. Most of those plans to come back involve testing, and involve testing their entire populations and regularly. Do you think we'll have that kind of testing capability ready by then?
I don't know. I mean, that's hard to say. I've been disappointed with what I've seen so far. I mean, I don't know. I also think it's very complicated because, really, some people are saying, you take, a fever, temperature, but really one of the biggest problems why COVID has been so, I don't know what the right word is, nefarious or insidious is that, when people are asymptomatic, that other people don't realize it. And so whether you could find out on day one when somebody actually has it, I don't know. I mean, right. And how do you get tested? Is it once a day going to be enough, and will you get a positive? I mean, again, I'm just saying, because I don't know. I think it's complicated. I think you have to the point you're making, I think you have to do everything. I think social distancing, masks, all these things are very important. And then the question is, what type of masks, how far are social distancing? But, there are a lot of things that aren't being done right now as people are starting to go back to different types of things.
Yeah. Speaking of masks, I have to talk about this. So, I heard from Shelley Amster a few weeks ago that you had been involved in developing a mask that New Balance is manufacturing. And I'm just curious, how did that all come about? How did you get involved in designing a mask?
Yeah, well, we've actually been involved in a couple of efforts on masks. Gio Traverso and James Byrne in our lab have done some great work on that at MIT. But in this particular case, Jim Rathmal, is at Partners, who called me up, and they were desperate for good masks at Partners and Brigham and Women's and Mass General, and he said, there are a lot of material problems, and could I help? And he said New Balance was willing to help, but they didn't have any medical background. So I got a team of our people, some of whom I just mentioned, and others as well. And, we worked with them, and I mean, they're a terrific company. They did a great job, and they, made these masks, but it really came because of Partners. I mean, and Jim Rathmal.
Interesting. I tried to buy one, but they're only sort of available in wholesale quantities. And I know after we're done with the fireside chat, just for everybody in the audience, we're going to go back to networking. and Shelly Amster's got a mask, and it's very cool looking. So if you guys want to see what it looks like, you'll get a chance to see it.
Yeah. But I'm a big believer in masks. I mean, I felt like both the CDC and the World Health Organization really, sadly, again, this gets back to leadership, really misled everybody. I mean, both of them for the longest time said people shouldn't wear masks. I mean, I think their intent was to say that you want to leave the mask for the hospital workers, but still finally by early April, which was way too late, the CDC said people should wear masks, any type of masks. And I think the World Health Organization still has not retracted their statement. And I just think that's terribly dangerous to me, there's nothing to lose. I mean, the World Health Organization said there's no evidence that it helps and there's some evidence that it hurts. But of course, they never showed any of that evidence. And that's really sad to me that these two organizations, which we all rely on, I think gave very, very poor evidence on masks. I think we'd be, I've been wearing masks for a long time, way before, my daughter told me to start wearing masks in February. And, and I think that's certainly a very, very important thing to do. And then, of course, there's the challenge of designing better and better masks. And I think that's something that would be very, very worthwhile. And New Balance is a good example of a company that did some of that.
Yeah, and I'd heard that the governor was actually supposed to go to New Balance today. Because of the mask thing, but then because of what's going on here with the riots and all that, had to cancel a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, I have to be honest with you. I started wearing a mask, and believe it or not, there's a side benefit. This is pollen season, and I find with the mask, I actually don't need to take my antihistamines.
Well, there you go. That's going to be a big thing, no matter what. That's great.
Yeah. So I've decided I'm going to wear a mask every year at this time of year. So.
Well, I hope pollen will be the only thing you need it for some time.
Yeah. No, I hope so too. As you know, I teach your case at BU on the Langer Lab, and some of the questions that are coming through here in the chat are about, this prolific process that you have of attracting in great grad students, getting to work on really important problems, and then, supporting them if they want to do a spin out and try to commercialize it. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Did you just stumble on that, and or you've just made it better over time?
Well, I don't know that I did that much, but I mean, I guess a couple things. When I started out doing my research, I was, in the 70s and early 80s, I was very naive. I, thought, well, you publish papers. If you publish papers, people will use what you do. But that happened to a certain extent, but certainly not to the extent that I wanted it to happen. So then I got the idea, well, I'll write patents, and then people then people will hopefully be even more incented to use them. But then we licensed these patents to big companies, and sadly they give us grant money, which was great, but they didn't really have, I don't know if I should say the passion or the commitment to develop them the way, so that you'd have products out the door, like we're talking about now with Moderna and other companies. So Alex Klebanoff, who was a very good friend of mine, professor at MIT, must have said to me around 1985, he said, Bob, we should start a company ourselves. And we did. And, it worked out well. I mean, today that company merged with Alkermes. It's made lots of products. And so so I thought that was a really good experience. So we kept on doing it. We kept writing these papers in Science or Nature, but we'd write patents. And a lot of the students in the lab, they were excited about, they'd spent 4, 5, 6 years of their life developing these things. They wanted to see them get used. So they would often go to help start these companies. And they had so much more passion, people that were working at the large companies that we just licensed it to. So in many cases, this kind of approach led to these companies not being so small, that they'd grow and they'd make a lot of products. Yeah. So So I think that it really came from that. I think MIT has been a very entrepreneurial environment. At MIT also has had a great technology licensing office that's done a really good job. But I think, and the Boston area has been wonderful for these kinds of things. There's a lot of outstanding venture capitalists and people like that.
Yeah, and I would also say, in addition to those spinouts, some of your students have gone on to replicate what you're doing in academia. And one that comes to mind is Jeff Carr, who a fellow Canadian who I got to know in a different way.
Well, that's right. Jeff has done a great job. In fact, we've started several companies together, Tisium and frequency therapeutics, and he's been great. But gee, even but I've seen some of my students at BU, like Arturo Vegas helped us, who's at BU, helped us start Sigalon, and with Dan Anderson, who was one of my postdocs, now professor at MIT. So I think that, and there's lots of other people at MIT and Harvard, like Elazar Edelman and others who have just done an amazing job. So I've been very, very lucky over the years. I've had wonderful students and postdocs, and I think close to 400 are professors now all over the world. And you're right, some of them have been very entrepreneurial.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. I've got involved with a spin out from the Media Lab at MIT that is taking some privacy research and has deployed it into digital contact tracing for, when somebody gets diagnosed as having been infected, you now have to do a reverse breadcrumb to see where they've been and who they've got in contact with. And frankly, the ideal is if you can go back far enough and figure out how they got infected. And and it's probably been, of all the spin outs I've worked with, this one has moved faster than anything I've seen. In 8 weeks, we've started a company, we've made it a nonprofit, we raised $2.5 million. We've got a team, we've got about 80 organizations, institutions, public health institutions around the world looking at us right now. And we're going to have this professor, Ramesh Raskar, come in and speak about it in one of these Tuesday series too.
That's terrific. That's great. Well, congratulations. I think that sounds exciting, and it's certainly important. And the tracing that you're saying, I think that has been something that they've done in Asia, and I think it's been very, very important. That's great.
Yeah, and the way they've done it in, say, South Korea would never be allowed in the US, because in South Korea they get access to your credit card data and video cameras everywhere, which here, as there's no way that would happen. So leading with privacy is sort of the key. And but yeah, this region is such a prolific area of these kind of solutions. Can you think of any others that we're working on here that people should know about, and maybe we can even bring some speakers on to talk about?
Well, I think there's a lot of things going on, like, again, I'll just pick people in our lab and actually some of the things in our building. But, people are working on, in our lab, for example, ways of coming up with ultra cheap ventilators that are very inexpensive and portable, ways of splitting ventilators, which I think are important. There's lots of things in diagnostics, as you mentioned. There's new ways of, people trying to develop, organs on a chip that might be helpful in screening drugs and things like that. The Boston area, you couldn't be in a better place where there's great research. And certainly, the vaccine area, you asked about our work, with Moderna, but we've also collaborated with Dan Baruch, who's done some great work. And he's, in fact, Anna Jakulenik in our lab, we've been working on a way of giving vaccines. This is with the Gates Foundation, and I'll come back to Dan in a second. But and the whole point there is, can we give it, right now, all these injections are given multiple times. Probably in the United States and the developed world, that'll be okay, but in the developing world, it's not. So, Anna's come up, we published one of these papers in Science, And we came up with a way to give an injection where you can just do it once, and you put all the vaccines you need. This is still in animal trials, but you can basically have what's called a self-boosting vaccine. And so we've been talking with Dan about doing some of the things like with not necessarily COVID, but other areas where you could have self-boosting vaccines. So I mean, and there's just so many other things. We're working with people at the Pick Hour on brain affect things that might affect brain blood vessels and things like that. And so I think that the Boston area is just you couldn't find a better group of people to collaborate or interact with.
Yeah, and that's really the word is collaborate, right? I mean, even when you think about leadership in government, we were the first state to put up manual tracing with Partners in Health. Now, here's an organization that's been around for, I don't know how long, 30 years, and they've mainly been focused in the developing world around things like Ebola and Zika. And so they had this capability already, and now they're applying it right here at home.
Right, and that's of course was Bill Gates's point. That's just so important. I mean and we don't know. That pandemics are going to happen again. And you don't know. And sadly, I mean, even economically, I don't think that. When you were talking about companies, I mean, if you ask most venture capitalists, do you want to start a company in vaccines? Well, absolutely not. It's not profitable. Do you want to start a company in diagnostics? And again, they say no, because it's not profitable. So sadly, the way things are set up economically, it makes it much more difficult. Fortunately, there's a lot of good work in academia, but that's one thing to have made discoveries. It's totally another to have them available to many, many people all over the country and all over the world.
Yeah, certainly infectious diseases was not kind of a hot area for investors. It's always been cancer but
very I want to see that stop. It's just, to me, I'd rather see an investment in science than than a lot of other things that people spend money on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll tell you, if I had to write a check today, it'll be to a diagnostics company, because no matter what, over the next couple of years, we're going to be doing a lot of testing, not just for viral load and for serology. And so, I keep hearing about this new technology, LAMP, which several people around the world are working on. I think the Weiss is working on it too. That could be a good point of care test. So just looking at some of the questions that are coming on the chat. One question that's coming up repeatedly is that as the virus mutates, can the Moderna vaccine still be used, or does it have to also evolve?
I think it depends what the mutation is. I mean, most of these vaccines, Moderna included, is going after the spike protein. So I think I think it depends on what the mutation is.
Got it.
I think spike protein there. I think it should probably work fine.
Right, and look, I mean, our past experience with these coronaviruses is that they come and then they go. So they either mutate themselves away from being harmful to us, or or we find ways to counter them. So is that a possibility here, that it might mutate away from not harming us?
I'm not expert enough to know. I mean, I think we have to be prepared that I think we have to be prepared for that this could be around for a while.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, listen, I promised you this would be 30 minutes. We're a couple of minutes over, but really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And we wish you all the good wishes around staying healthy and safe. And I'll leave you with one last question. So as we open up, when do you think your lab's going to open up and it's going to welcome students back?
Well, MIT is already, I mean, right now they're doing it in stages. So I think now people can work for an average of 12 and a half hours if they sort of do social distancing and wear masks and get tested and things like that. But I think I think just like the state, it's an iterative process to see how we do and to make sure that students and postdocs are safe. But it is starting to open up slowly.
Great. Well, it's always wonderful to talk with you. And enjoy the summer.
You too. Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
Take care. And so just for everybody in the audience, we're going to move back into networking mode. So we have lots of tables. We have sponsor tables, MassBio, John Hallinan's here, Novo Nordisk is here, Pepper Hamilton is here, Lilly's here, McDermott, a bunch of other sponsors are here. Please stick around. You'll find lots of like-minded people to have conversations about what Dr. Langer just spoke about. And, we're just trying out this platform. Would love to get your feedback on it as well, if you have ideas of how we can make it better. And please, come back every Tuesday. We'll have some great speakers for you. So over to networking, I'm going to be around too. So we'll be joining tables and we'll have a chat to talk with everybody.